Thank you, everybody, for coming to our class, Gen Zs and Millennials, the Future of the Workforce. My name is Ryan Condon, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Satisfied. We've been working with equipment dealers for the last 26 years, doing customer and employee satisfaction survey processes. I personally deliver a lot of our employee satisfaction presentations to leadership, talking about challenges in the workforce, what they're experiencing in their dealerships. And one of the things that continues to come up over and over again is this Gen Z and millennial workforce, and my gosh, how are we going to make it work? And when are they going to realize that they need to become more like us, and things like that? So when we were thinking about putting on a class today, JDUG, we thought what a great opportunity to share and have a couple people talk a little bit about their experiences. What's it like being a Gen Z or millennial in today's workforce at the dealership? So great opportunity here. We have Peyton Garrett, who's with us from King Ranch, and Savannah Basie from Stotz Equipment. And let me give you a little background on them real quick. Peyton is currently serving as a marketing manager for King Ranch Ag and Turf, a role she's held since November 2023. Prior to that, Peyton worked as a marketing manager at Star S Ranch for over 2 years, where she contributed to the development and execution of strategic market initiatives. Peyton holds a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Management from Texas A&M University. Awesome. And a master's degree in Business Administration and Management from Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. Savannah Basie is a corporate marketing manager at Stotz Equipment, where she leads innovative marketing strategies to elevate brand visibility and foster customer engagement. She is deeply committed to enhancing equipment uptime for customers and has played a key role in managing marketing budgets and executing multifaceted plans that align with the company's mission of providing flexible solutions for clients. Savannah earned a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Business from Colorado State University, where she was actively involved in organizations such as the CSU Collegiate Farm Bureau and the CSU Young Farmers. So give me a applause here for these two panelists that are going to talk to you today. Thanks so much for coming. Anything I left out that you guys want to add? No? Awesome. Okay, so today's session is really about giving you information and tools to take back to the dealership to be able to better understand how to work with Gen Zs and Millennials. So our goal is really to share that information with you. We also want this to be an interactive session. So some of the feedback we've gotten from previous classes is they were actually a little disappointed that we didn't allow more audience participation. So as we're going through this, if you hear something that's interesting or you have a question that you want to dig in the middle of the session, please feel free to raise your hand. We probably won't be able to get to everybody, but we definitely want to get some audience participation, so let us know if you have something you want to talk about. All right, let's get rolling. Let me get my notes up here. So let's understand kind of from the perspective of, you're a Gen Z, correct?
Yes.
And you're a millennial. And so we have two different perspectives up here. And so what we want to start off with is explaining, maybe we'll start with you, Peyton, starting with like kind of how do you see Gen Zs and how do you see them in the workforce and specifically at the dealership? So kind of level set, what does it mean to be a Gen Z?
Yeah, I think most Gen Zs are really focused on wanting innovative technology, efficiencies, flexibility, a work-life balance, that type of thing. And every company is different, obviously. So just adapting to that kind of lifestyle is a huge thing for people my age.
And how do you think that differs from, say, boomers and Gen Xers and maybe millennials?
I think that, let's see, like I always say that we were the class of technology. So like we were the trial and error babies in school that had iPads, and we went from this worked to this didn't work, and we had to learn to adapt to that overnight or over the course of a school year, whatever it was. And so knowing that that is possible, I think that's different than all of the generations older than us. They had a very slow roll of technology being implemented. Things were slower paced. That's just not what we're used to.
Great. And so tell me about millennials. What are they? Who are they? How are they different specifically to Gen Zs?
I think millennials are happy there's finally a next generation to take some of the blame. Oh, no, but in all seriousness, I think the work-life balance that you brought up is a big deal to millennials, especially now. I think most millennials are getting to a point where we aren't the youngins anymore. You know, we're in our 30s, 40s and have families, and that work-life balance is important. And how that differs from generations before us, I think a big part of it is we do have more dual income families than we've ever had, and with both parents working, that's a big part of that work-life balance being more important than it may have been in the past.
Great. Any questions about that so far? Any questions or comments about kind of what the perception of a Gen Z or a millennial is? Okay. Key motivators for both groups. So Peyton, let's start with you. Like, what do you think are key motivators for Gen Z staff?
Efficiency,
Okay.
flexibility, technology, just open-mindedness would be the biggest thing.
And so is that pretty common in the dealership today? Is it changing? What do you see?
I think it depends on the dealership. Obviously, we all have our struggles with Deere and things being slow and not talking to each other and working together, but I'm fortunate and have a younger leadership team, so we have that. I've talked to other dealers, people my age, who struggle with it. They get a lot of pushback on wanting things to be done, things not getting done, wanting to implement new processes, new softwares, new technologies, things of that sort. So I think it goes both ways, and I think it, especially in the Deere world, depends on the dealership.
Okay, and then, so for old people like me, I'm 51. I'm a Gen Xer. Let's say that some people are in situations where they don't have younger leadership, but the leadership is committed to creating an environment that is supportive of Gen Z and millennial workforce. What do you tell them? How do you start down that path of trying to figure out how you need to change behavior, understand behavior to be more supportive?
I think just tasking Gen Z with a project that they could do to show the benefit of it is one way to do that. Not necessarily going overboard and saying, we're going to do all of this at once. Start small. A project that is beneficial to the organization and not just a waste of time, and then go from there. See how everyone buys into it, see what the implementation process looks like, and then just build off of that.
Great, thanks. Millennials, motivators, different than Gen Z. Where do you fall?
I think a lot of them align as far as efficiencies and maybe doing things a little bit differently than they were done in the past. I think you see that with each generation, right? You have more technology at your fingertips. You want to do things a little differently than the generation before. And sometimes there can be some friction there, just kind of shaking things up a little bit. But I think being heard and having leadership willing to make changes, whether it is adopt a new technology or even, watching millennials kind of start to fill these leadership roles. I think that is all an important step to kind of help fill that gap. I look at our last 4 hires on our team were all Gen Z. And I don't think I realized that until we started talking about it a while ago. And I often feel like I am a buffer between Gen X, for example, my boss is Gen X, and Gen Z. And I sometimes feel like a translator, and I think it's important to have that generation, because the bigger of a generation gap you have between leadership and the people they're leading, you're going to have a bit of a disconnect. So I think just having the generational roles, having millennials in leadership roles, having that gap filled is helpful, because a lot of those priorities I think I also align with as a millennial, but I do see it more predominantly in Gen Z. So I like being able to translate, per se, for my boss when sometimes there's a disconnect.
So give us an idea what you mean by translate. So, obviously they're both speaking English, they're both engaged in trying to,
You would think.
Well,
have you heard some
not.
of the lingo lately? Talk about feeling old.
No, that's a fair comment. My kids, right?
Sometimes it's literal translations. But
what
more
are you
than not, it is, I think this is where some of those misconceptions come in. So I think this is going to be one of your questions, so I'm probably jumping ahead
That's
here.
fine.
But
Yep.
we'll maybe segue into that. There is a misconception when someone does something differently that maybe it's not being done, or that someone's lazy because they don't want to do it the old way. And that is something I've seen with Gen Z in a leadership role, where I feel like I've had to explain it to people above me, to explain this person's not lazy, they just found a more efficient way to do it, and we should probably listen to them. And there's some of that, and also just communication, I think, is a big one. I think Gen Z and millennials unfairly get pegged as maybe not being the best communicators. You hear, they're always on their phone, they don't know how to pick up a phone and talk, they want to text, or whatever the case is. But I feel like millennials and Gen Z, in my case and on my team, are, if anything, they expect communication constantly. They expect responses constantly. They communicate in several different ways, whether that's on Teams or texting someone or calling them. There is that expectation of quick turnaround time, everything kind of moving at a fast pace, and communication's a big part of it. So that would just be an example of communication, for example. Maybe because someone didn't pick up a phone, oh, well, they didn't reach out. And it's like, well, efficiency in this case maybe did look like a text message or a Teams message to get a quick response, and their expectation was to get that quick response. And so that's kind of what I mean when I say translation, just explaining some of those misconceptions and doing things differently. Maybe it's not the best. Maybe we did need to pick up a phone in that case, and that's kind of the two-way translation, letting someone know maybe you should just pick up a phone. But just being in that in-between. And I think part of that might be the fact that as a millennial, we did have to pick up the phone. I still had people call my house and ask for me, and that was a skill set that we developed. But we had to quickly adapt and got into AIM and AOL and, slowly went down that progression of technology and had to adapt it as well. At a slower pace, for sure. It's not all we know, but I am grateful that I feel like I have that phone skill set and the technology skill set and can be kind of that buffer between the two generations that are maybe a little further disconnected.
I didn't ask this when we talked before for prepping for the session, but I've heard comments. So in our employee satisfaction surveys, I've looked at a bunch of different companies and kind of how the different generations rate their willingness to recommend that location as a place to, or that dealer group as a place to work. And can we throw that slide up? So you can see here as we go through the different generations from boomers and X's and millennials and Gen Z, we have this ever decreasing net promoter score or willingness to recommend that dealership as a place for friends or colleagues to work, right? And it's really interesting because we can, when we look at millennials and Gen Zs as the future of the workforce, they're the least happy or the least engaged at those dealerships. And I think, we've talked to different groups, and some have Gen Zs that were outperforming millennials and have higher levels of satisfaction, and some have significantly lower Gen Z and millennial scores. And one of the issues that came up in that dealer group that I worked with that had really low Gen Z and millennial scores is, as I said, you really need to figure out how you're going to drive these scores up. And the response to me was, I think we're going to wait it out. And I said, what do you mean you're going to wait it out? And they said, well, we don't really think they understand how to work the way that they need to work to be successful in our environment. And we think they'll eventually figure it out. And then they'll figure out that they want a job and they are going to, have to do what they need to do to meet our expectations up on the Boomer and Gen X. And I think we all sort of can laugh about the reality of whether or not the Gen Z and millennials are going to sort of change all their behaviors and become, Boomers and Gen X's. It's not going to happen. So what triggered that thought for me was in those situations where the dealerships or the staff, the Gen Z is looking for more immediate feedback and response, how are you working with Boomers and Gen Xers to help them understand the importance of that? Or in that case of, are you meeting in the middle? Is the Gen Z and millennial having to understand that sometimes responses are slower? Yeah. Or what's that?
We don't have a formal process. It very much feels like everyone's meeting in the middle. And I think a big part of it is just understanding just the perception, right? So again, maybe thinking someone's lazy because they're doing something a quicker way, where that person's maybe just being efficient, and being able to communicate that, I think, is important. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. Anybody in the audience have similar experiences where they're having those challenges with communication, where maybe the younger generations are expecting some over communication and the older generations are exhausted or feeling like they have to communicate too much? Anybody?
I think you have to change your communication style almost, because the way we, as baby boomer and Gen X, took in the information was in one big clump. We could look at something for an hour at a time, and the Gen Zs and millennials are much more rapid in what they're doing. So if you're doing a training program in your dealership, you've got to adapt it to almost the generation, if you will, because the Generation X versus the Generation Z or Z. I'm Canadian, so you have to excuse it.
We'll take Z here. Yeah.
Would be much different on how I would present it to each group.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
So how have you each
Transparency, can you explain what you mean by that?
So when I say transparency, that to me, as a millennial, that means I'm giving you all of the information that I possibly can to help you be successful,
Yeah.
right? Even if, and I'm not assuming that you know exactly how it's going to happen from A to Z. So sometimes I think that when maybe a baby boomer or a Gen X hear the word transparency, it isn't perceived as a positive.
So do you feel like they maybe are more interested in kind of piecemealing the information that you need to have when they think
Yeah.
you need it, and you're
Yeah.
asking for, hey, give me everything I need to
Yeah.
know? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys experience that, or?
I would say it depends on the person and who you're working with, and just kind of learning their style of work and the best ways to relay information to them. It's kind of to your point, transparency might mean something different to everyone. So just kind of knowing your audience, and some people don't need to know, like in my position in marketing, I can give all the details of a certain campaign that we're running. That means nothing to some people. So just knowing that that's not relevant information, and I can still be transparent with the person that I'm talking to, I think is the biggest effective and efficient way to do that.
So have there been other Gen Zs that you mentor with that right there?
I am the only Gen Z in our organization right now, at least in our office. So I do work, like a couple of our agencies that we use have some Gen Z, and I can see that we communicate similarly, and I think that's just kind of the unspoken of our generation.
Thank you. Do you have what's the dad?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Great. Strategies for attracting Gen Z and millennial talent. So how is it different, from, either using recruiters or job postings or interview discussions, or transparency on what exists at the dealership, setting expectations. Talk to me about what are critical components of attracting?
I think kind of going back to that transparency word, I think that is something that's so important to both generations. I think we're used to having information at our fingertips. We're used to being able to Google something and just look it up. And I know everyone Googles things. I'm not trying to offend all other generations, but I think there is a certain level of we've always had that at our fingertips. It may have started with Encarta 98, but we could still look things up quickly. And I feel like that need for information translates in many ways. So kind of going back to the transparency comment, in the workplace, we do want all the information up front because we're used to having information, not being fed the little bits that we need, or just a more traditional setting where you're just given what you need. We want the whole picture. We want all the information we can get. So I think in the hiring process, that's a big part of it as well. Kind of getting away from, I don't want to say getting away from formal interviews, but it being more conversational. I don't want to be asked, what's your 5-year plan? Let's do better. I think interviews are still very important, but I think having conversations with people and you get more out of who that person is. It's less performative. You can have those transparent conversations and really get to know the person. I also think this is kind of an obvious one, that technology is a lot more important than it was in the past. I don't think people are going to career fairs as often. I know it's been our experience. And even people on our team I've talked to, did you go to your college career fairs? And they're like, no, kind of popped in, but did most of it online. So that online presence as far as recruiting goes, and from an HR standpoint, making sure that is a reflection, your online presence is a reflection of your dealership, I think is really important, because that's where all of that that's your first impression basically with anyone you're recruiting these days.
Thanks. Anything on recruiting?
Yeah, so I graduated in the middle of COVID, so you can imagine what the market was like. I would say the biggest thing is communication. It seems to be a struggle. A lot of my friends who've gone through kind of the hiring interview process, just respond to the candidates. That's all that people want. Just, yes, we got your application. Yes, we're still taking applications. Yes, we're looking. I think that goes a lot further than people think.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So the other interesting thing that I heard is that during the interview process, setting appropriate expectations for their career opportunities in the business. So one of the things that we saw at a dealership that had really high scores on Gen Z and Millennials is I was really shocked on the level of engagement and Net Promoter Score. And so when we dug into why, they said that they had started creating career paths for new employees that came on board. And so as they started to recruit and talk to those prospective employees, they said, you'll have a path, it's a multi-year path, you'll be able to give training opportunities that align to that path. If you want to switch along the way, that's fine, right? But we want to have some sort of upward mobility that you understand what it's like. The other interesting thing is when you looked at the employees that had been in that organization for 6 to 10 years, they actually had significantly lower satisfaction and a willingness to recommend. And we dug into that, and I'm like, well, what's going on there? And they're like, well, we understand. They're actually pretty upset. They feel like they got ripped off. They feel like the new employees that are coming in that have these upward mobility career paths and the defined training plans and things like that are at a significant advantage to being able to have success in the dealership and the business, and that they feel like they did not have the same opportunities, and so they're upset about it. So great learning. Yes, go ahead.
And kind of to that point, I guess I'm playing devil's advocate
Yep.
here. I see the benefits of identifying and understanding motivators of different generations, but at the same time, though, I think could also play the opposite of maybe placing labels on people and losing them on the individuals, because everybody, even if they're Gen Z, Millennial, it's individual motivators and experiences. So I guess my point, can this also be detrimental if we put too much emphasis on catering to the different generational differences?
Well, so I think it's a great question. Well, I'll let you guys answer. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think there is something to that. I think it's important to look at these motivators to see what is driving people, this is a generalization, right? There might be people that don't fit into this box, or maybe something else drives them. We are individuals, like you said. So I don't think you can put people in a box too much, but I still think this is really helpful overall, just to understand in general what is driving this next generation and the current generation and the one before. But as a millennial, again, I think we took some wrath for a while, and I didn't like being put in that box. So, yeah, but at the core, I think when you understand a lot of these drivers, it gets rid of a lot of the negative perceptions or connotations that are tied to generations. I think we have fun with it and kind of make fun of each other, but I think there is some truth to that. I don't want to put someone in a box just because they are a certain generation. I even see it on our team. We have people that are Gen Z, on this end of Gen Z, and some that are closer to millennials, and it's funny because I just see a difference even in them. I feel like I do really see more millennial-ish traits in some of the Gen Z that are closer to that, age, I guess. So I certainly wouldn't put them in a box just because of their generational title, but I do appreciate knowing some of this underlying stuff. I think it helps us just be more successful managers.
I think she pretty much
Right.
covered it.
Well, and I think too, the question is, do you use it for good or do you use it for bad, right? So like in situations where you're having a struggle with someone in the organization, do you talk negatively about that person, or do you kind of disparage them a little bit because of their generational class? Or do you use it as an opportunity to try to think like, okay, wow, this is really different than I do things. But this is the way they do it, and how do we translate or bridge the gap to what I think is the right way based on my understanding of how that generation operates? So I think it's a great question. Any other questions? Go ahead.
It goes both ways, right? Like, I feel like we need to learn about Gen X and boomers, and how do we efficiently work with them too. But on the flip side, how do we create a whole environment to where we all compromise, right? We all find that middle ground, because we're not necessarily wanting Gen X and the boomers to be on all the applications and everything like that and learn all the technologies. And there's something to learn from the other generations as far as be it work ethic or traditions or culture and things like that too. So I guess, how do you create that environment of the middle ground? I feel like our society in general is just extremist, one way or the other. I think we've all lost the middle.
I think part of what you said is key, and it's looking at the strengths that each generation has to offer instead of looking at it as, here's all of the roadblocks. Okay, well, what are the strengths and how can we utilize those? And I think meeting in the middle means taking the strengths from each of those generations and leaning into them. I'm not going to force a boomer in the office to run the social media page. That just doesn't make sense. But that person has different skill sets, and I'm going to lean into each generation's skill sets, I think, when you're looking at allocations of responsibilities. And so I think when you look at it that way, it's just kind of a more positive spin on it. Yeah, the challenges are there. We're not going to gloss over that. But I think one way to meet in the middle is by looking at all of those strengths and kind of planning your team accordingly.
And I think it's something, too, that just takes time. And everyone's team is going to be different. And realistically, the boomers and Gen X, they were the young generation at one point in their career. And so, maybe talking to them about how did they feel, what did they do to adapt to being the young ones instead of the older generations, and just figuring it out based on your culture, your values, your organization.
Go ahead.
I guess to me, one of the key points too is when the question came up about transparency, one of the first things was, what's our working definition? So when you're navigating that, then you want to validate this, I'm going to try to do it this way out of assistance for you. How does that come across? And just keep working on those assumptions, because we can also jump to conclusions and think we're helping, and they don't necessarily know where we're coming from. So it's just a lot of dialogue, and then trying to stay out of stereotypes. Is your intent to dig in to understand, or is your intent to say maybe control and try to guide them more towards being like me? Well, that's probably going to be unsuccessful both sides. So.
No, great. Thank you very much. The other thing that I wonder, and I don't know if anybody does this, do you guys have any type of training or processes for helping different generations in the dealership understand the differences that exist in the different generations and the positives and negatives?
Not officially, not formally.
Yeah, as we're all talking, I'm thinking, we look at our scores and we look at the significant variations from boomers down to Gen Zs. We look at the differences between them, and we all sit in this room and we think we know what those differences really are. But the question is we working in the dealership to define what that means, to define what the pros are, what the cons are, right? They're always, being transparent and saying, hey, listen, there are some challenges that exist with each generation, and each one's going to have to be sort of a little bit thick-skinned to understand that, there are some downsides to certain generations while there's some significant upsides. And so it would be interesting to have some training or some fun workshops or something like that sort of talks about kind of, taking somebody from each one of the generations in your dealership and having them explain kind of who they are in the light of this kind of, class, and what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at, what they're not good at, and then how does that contribute overall? Because I do think that there needs to be a meeting in the middle, right? We all can't go one way or the other and assume that that's all going to work. And I also think it's critical to put the right people in the right roles. I had a dealer group that I was working with that said, I really don't think too much about the different generations. He said, we just hire the right people in the right roles, and they work together well. Now, that's a perfect situation, and so, kudos to them. But I think having some way of being able to help people in the organization understand the differences so that we can get some of those Gen Z and Millennial scores higher, and they're feeling more engaged in the workforce. Yes?
So let's just talk a little bit, maybe along those same lines, because departments aren't generational, right? There's generational diversity amongst the department, right? So think about incentive plans, right? And how do you get either just interested in your response, or anybody's got any suggestions how they're looking at an incentive plan that can apply to the diversity of those generations? To the comment of, well, the latest generation just isn't motivated by money. Money is a motivator, but it is not relatable the way it used to be for a boomer or an X or something like that in that context. I'd just be interested in your thoughts. How do you respond to that when people talk about that? Because I know I've heard it more than one time since I've been here.
Do you guys think that a standard, like a consistent incentive plan across the organization works with the different generations?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about that much. What are your thoughts?
I think it's with anything. Something standard will work. good enough, but it's not everyone's going to be satisfied. Not everyone's going to be thrilled. I think some Gen Zs are probably more motivated by money than others. Some probably don't even think about benefits, insurance, anything of that sort when they're looking for a job, and others do. I think it kind of goes back to you can't put them in a box. Everyone kind of has their own personality. They're all individual. I think you have to look at it on a person-by-person case.
Yeah. Anybody else have they tried anything or experienced anything different in their organization with offering different incentive strategies? Maybe it's an opt-in strategy where you can kind of pick one or pick the other, or nothing? Okay. Yep. Go ahead.
Just on that point, our incentives are based on the company needs, right, our goals. And that straight line, I think, provides a stepping stone right there. But it's kind of understanding, and what I mean from up front there, is kind of understanding how to motivate them to hit that goal in different ways. Each generation is going to take that and find a different way to reach that. But maybe understanding that side of it versus separate incentive plans.
I like that. I think that, just kind of thinking through this out loud, I think that might be part of it. Because in the end, a business is trying to make money. In the end, we all have a job because we're trying to make money. So money does speak to all generations, or we wouldn't be here. But I think a key part of that, like you said, is maybe how we reach those goals. So having those communications about what we're trying to do as a company and what those individual goals look like to help reach those bigger goals, and giving people that flexibility to reach them in different ways. That said, I think money can't replace some of the other things that are important to younger generations. You can't, I think we're past a time where money is the only thing that checks the box. I think it is an incentive. Obviously, again, we're all working for a reason, but I think it can't be the only thing that's being offered. You know, I think in the younger generations especially, if they don't have that work-life balance, or if they don't have the benefits or whatever else, then those financial incentives aren't gonna cut it. I think it is kind of a bigger picture, but I think there's still place for those kinds of incentives. Again, just having the flexibility to reach those goals in your own way.
That's great. Thank you. Yes.
How do you change the perception from a loyalty aspect? Because from Generation Z and Millennial, the turnover is higher from a baby boomer to a Generation X, because they've been loyal to the company for so many years. Like, loyalty is like up here for them, but for Millennials, Generation Zs, they're like, I'm just going on with my life. Like, this is my next adventure type of feeling, type of thing. So how do you fill that gap, I guess, from a loyalty standpoint? Because there are businesses that do, care about that loyalty, if you will, especially when you're dealing with customers that farmers, and if you're building that rapport with them, with that generation, and giving them that kind of what boomers would say is a chance, if you will. But why? But then the customer kind of like hurts from it, if you will. So
With the turnover,
loyalty factor.
Can I, before you guys answer, I just want to ask one question. What is your definition of loyalty?
Well, I think it depends on what generation you're in, though, too. So.
Let's give me a definition of, and if you don't want, like, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but definition of boomer loyalty and definition of Gen Z loyalty.
Wait, definition.
Your perspective, like, what does loyalty mean to a boomer, and what is, and then what do you think loyalty should be for a Gen Z, and why are they different?
Well, for boomer, just from personal knowledge, I've been there, I've done the work, I've put in the time, I've, made sacrifices, I've dealt with the changes, all the adaptations that the company's been through, and I know it from the inside and out.
Okay.
I'm not really sure if I'm Gen Z.
Okay.
That's kind of my question.
Awesome. Love it. Okay, go ahead. So I just want, because I'm going to answer after you guys. I've got a strong perspective on this.
Yeah.
Probably not right, but go ahead.
One thing I thought, this is actually a conversation I had with a Gen Z member of our team before coming here when I mentioned I was doing this class. it felt like such an obvious answer when she gave it, and like something that we're all looking for, but it really gave me some perspective into how she viewed loyalty specifically, and it kind of ties into some of the recruiting stuff we were talking about too. But I asked her what some misconceptions were about Gen Z from her point of view. And she said, I think we get pegged as being very selfish. She's like, but to me, when I go into an interview, I'm not just being interviewed. I'm also interviewing this company to decide if I want to work there. And I was like, wow, I've never thought of that before. So simple, but I feel like as a millennial, I don't know if it was the year I graduated college, but I felt like I was being interviewed. I was being, I had to perform, basically. I didn't think about the fact that I'm interviewing the company as well. And to her, that was a big piece of it. And she said when she looks at loyalty, she's like, I might stay. She goes, but I'm here, this is part of my journey. And she goes, I look at people that have been here 30 years. She's like, that's insane to me. That's not appealing. I don't want to be here 30 years. She's like, no offense. She's like, I might be. But thinking of that right now is not my goal. She goes, I look at what the company can offer me. And she's like, that's where the selfishness maybe comes in. She's like, but I don't think of it that way. So this is my journey, and I'm growing as a marketer. I want to become better. I want to learn, what can this company give me? How am I going to become better by working here? And then, in turn, be a better employee who's bringing more to the table and hopefully, helping your company be successful. So it all ties in together, but it was an interesting perspective that I hadn't really thought of before. Just the concept of interviewing the company and wanting to get stuff back from the company. And to her, being part of that team was her loyalty. She might stay 10 years, she doesn't know. But that wasn't appealing to her. That wasn't something that, when we talk about these 50-year employees, she's like, that sounds terrible. She's like, I might be here 50 years, I don't know, but that's not a selling point for her or for that generation. And I got what she was saying. I don't think I thought that way as a millennial. I think I did look at a 20-year employee and think, wow, something made them stay for 20 years. I wonder what it was. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting perspective. So her perception of loyalty was staying with the company, having a give and take. And maybe that means she stays if she continues to have that growth path and be able to develop, and if it matches her journey. Which, again, when you say it that way, it sounds a little selfish, but we're ultimately going to benefit from people becoming better and growing in our company. So that was a kind of an eye-opener for me, and I think it kind of ties into that question about loyalty.
Peyton, anything on loyalty as far as how Gen Zs perceive kind of what maybe boomers or Gen Xs call loyalty?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's like I don't want to go interview a bunch of jobs. I don't want to change jobs, which might be a little different than what your employees experience. But to me, management goes a long way. Like, I'm not just going to leave my job because I want to. But like, if I have a bad manager or bad leadership, that would drive me to leave. I think that that's probably, to me, I'm more loyal to people, and I want to succeed and do well for them, which then benefits the company. So that's kind of my perception of loyalty.
And do you think that is a Gen Z characteristic or more of a Peyton characteristic? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, what is, like, when we're thinking about Gen Z as a group, obviously we're going to have nuanced people that exist within that, right? And so I remember in our prep discussion, you were talking about stability being important for you. Mm-hmm. Do you find that with your friends as well?
Some of them, yes.
Okay.
A lot of them who have similar education to me, who are in management roles that have career paths they know they're going to develop, they have similar mindsets. Some who don't really know what they want to do, they're fine with hopping around. I think a lot of it depends on the person, their background, their personality. I get bored, so if I had to do the same thing every day, I would not want to sit in the same role forever. But knowing that we're on a growth path and that things are going to change, we're going to be able to do different things, that kind of gives me the freedom, I guess, to know that things are not going to be boring. So I think that's more of a me thing than probably a whole generation thing, but
I think it ties into that just faster paced, the generation in general being faster paced and getting bored easily. I think that was actually a word that the employee I was talking to used as well. So it wasn't, if she continued to grow and things continued to change and her interest was kept, she would stay. But I like what you said, and I agree that when it comes to being loyal, maybe more to a person or to your direct manager or to your team over necessarily the company. I think that goes a long way. And I can't speak on behalf of older generations, but I think there is that stereotype of like Clark Griswold hating your boss, and that's just what you did, but you worked there for 30 years.
Jelly of the Month Club?
Yeah. Where I think as the generations get younger, there's less tolerance for that. And I see it in my generation, and then I see this younger generation, and I'm like, gosh, they are just not gonna take it. They're gonna move on. And sometimes I admire it, and on the other end, sometimes it's like, okay, well, maybe tough it out for a little while. So that's kind of being that in-betweener, but.
Love it. Okay, just one quick comment on the, go ahead, do you want to say?
So as a generation, you're a Gen X.
Yes.
So what does the word growth mean to you?
Yeah, that's, so I have sort of an insatiable desire to learn. So I don't know, like, I like,
You're not the norm?
I'm constantly if I spend 50% of my day, like if I'm investigating Gen AI and I'm looking at like the agents and stuff that they're talking about, like to me, that's like awesome. So I can't be in a stagnant environment. So I'm probably really like a Gen Z type profile. No, I don't think it's the norm. I've always wanted to like just constantly learn and grow and evolve. And to me, once again, I think some of this stuff can be stereotypical of a generation and may not. So thank you. Your comment on loyalty. So I've been doing this for 26 years. My dad and I started this business back in 1998. And we would go into dealerships and we would go into OEMs and they would throw loyalty out. And as a young person, I was 24 or 5, I think, when we started doing this. And they would talk about, like, I can't believe that customer's not doing business with us anymore. You know, we've been loyal to them. I don't know why they're not loyal to us. And I'm sitting in the background, keeping my mouth shut, thinking, well, they're buying something from you so they can run their business, so they can create a profit, right? And they are making a business decision that is independent of some sort of abstract concept of loyalty, which is, hey, this isn't the right product for me. This isn't the right service for me. I'm not getting what I need, but you know what? My daddy did business with you and my grandpa did business with you. And so guess what? I'm going to continue to get the bad product and the bad service because I'm loyal to you. And so I have a lot of trouble with that word. I think that whether it's customer or employee, I think there always needs to be a fair exchange. And just recently I've had a couple conversations with older boomer type dealer employees that are no longer dealer employees and have been let go in some of the rifts that have been happening out there. And their response, they're shell-shocked, right? They're like, I've been loyal to this company for X number of years, 30 years, whatever it is, and it's over. And so I think the reality is that we sort of want to talk about loyalty when it's convenient. But the reality is, if we're not growing as an individual, if the organizations are not helping us become better, creating career paths for us, if they let us stagnate, or if we choose to stagnate in that role, because we just decide, hey, I don't mind coming in every day and doing the same thing, then that's fine. You know, go ahead.
I think the expectation of how fast that growth is supposed to take place
Yep.
is also different between generations. So
Yeah,
I love
agree
it.
with that.
that is for
Well,
individual, if you will.
yeah, I love it because I have this next question that I was going to throw back over here based on just that. So my question is, can an equipment dealership be interesting and exciting enough for a typical Gen Z or millennial person, right? Like, 'cause, you know, I hear people say to me in these leadership, these employee debriefs that I do for the employee surveys, and they're like, well, what do they expect? You know, like we all have to kind of do this every day. It's like, I mean, like, you know, I don't know what. So can a dealership, and I know you guys work there, and you may not be completely representative of the class or whatever, but can it be exciting enough for most Gen Z and millennials?
I think it's hard. It depends on the role, right? I can only speak on behalf of what I know.
Yep.
So in a marketing place, yes, in my opinion, we represent so many different regions and areas, and you know, aside from AOR, also market segments. So I feel like I do have the opportunity to market, you know, golf in California and farming potatoes in Idaho and cotton in Arizona, and that diversity is huge. And even if it's almost comparable to like an agency where you have that fast pace, things are constantly changing. And what you're working on is constantly changing, whether it's an event or print materials or whatever it is, a campaign for this or that, sprayer clinic. It feels like what's coming down our pipeline is very diverse and it changing. I know, again, I can only speak on behalf of a marketing role, but I know some feedback I've gotten from our team is they love the exposure they get to so many different facets of the industry. We're also, marketing parts and service, and just having that diversity alone. There are marketers that work for a company and market, one product. So to be able to just have that diversity, I think is very interesting and keeps us on our toes. The more I learn, the more I realize I have to learn, just because there is so much there. Again, from a marketing perspective.
No, I agree with that. Everything's changing. We have our hands in pretty much every department from the marketing side of things. So I think that definitely is appealing to my generation and the fast-paced environment that we all like.
Love it. So I'll get you one sec. I read an article that said that McDonald's turnover is 100% a year, which is insane. At the physical retail locations, right? And I don't know if that stat's exact, but it's probably pretty close, right? Which means they've had to create an onboarding process, an environment that allows brand new staff to have a completely new set of staff for the entire year, right? And so then the question becomes, is this traditional mindset of having an employee at the dealership for 30 or 40 years the right mindset from leadership today? Or when we bring in the younger generations, do we say, hey, listen, there's a good chance that in 2 to 3 years you're going to move on. But while you're here, I'm going to give you the tools and the education and the opportunity and the training, and I'm going to invest in you, not because I expect when I invest in you that you stay forever, but because I want you to do the best job and deliver the most value to this organization. And after 2 to 3 years, if you decide it's time to move on, just come talk to me. And let's talk about what that transition looks like. Let's make it seamless. And just thinking about in organizations whether that's the right discussion to start having. And if they stay for 10 or 20 years, it's not because of loyalty, but because of that fair trade, that commitment to growth and alignment to what that person desires from a career perspective. So, yes, go ahead, sorry.
I think I was just going to add on to what you just said.
Yeah.
The reality is, in the dealership world, most of our staff that were hired are service technicians, parts technicians. You may or may not have a growth path, but you certainly they're gonna hit a ceiling somewhere along the line. And my expectation is probably 2 to 3 years. Throughout my career when I hired people, my expectation was 4. So it really hasn't changed much. I think those 30-year, and I'm amazed when I hear 30, 40 years at one place, because that's not my experience. But those are the outliers to me. I think the reality is, if you can get 3 to 4 years of good productivity and give that person growth opportunities, they still may leave. Because if you're a service technician, maybe you can go into precision ag, maybe you can go into sales, but there may not be opportunities at that time that you're looking for. So chances are, if you can have what you just said, that discussion, come to me when when you hit the plateau, and let's talk about if there's any opportunities, even if it's veering off into sales, if you want to try that, or even if it's, but reality is there might not be, and that individual or employee, it's to their benefit to look to see what else is out there. I don't think it's generational per se. I think it's just individual.
Yep.
I think there is something to that, and just being young, 2 years is a lot. I kind of laugh at that because I think as I get older, 2 years feels like nothing. Where I remember having 2 years under my belt and that feeling, like a lot, because in my life, it was a lot. As a percentage of my life, 2 years was more significant than it is now. And I still feel that way. And I think part of that is maybe just being young. It's not necessarily generational. But so I think there is some truth to that.
I saw a hand over, was there? Yeah, go ahead.
So that's the kind of the hard thing for me is, in positions like sales or like turf sales, maybe not necessarily ag sales, but in my those sorts of things. It's fairly easy, and the expectation, again, in my eyes, is 2 to 4 years usually for that kind of person. That's not an issue with us. I mean, we have a pretty good rapport going with those people. Those people come in, they're able to get, like kind of like you guys are saying, exposed to a lot of different marketing tools and that sort of thing. So it's great for them to learn. But like he was saying, my problem is more on, like, especially the technician side, somewhat the parts side as well. And that's where we're at. Where a lot of we just had 3 retirements at one of our locations, 2 of which were technicians, and that's where I see the difficulty. Where I don't know where we're able to get that equipment knowledge. I mean, especially on the technical side, to get those people to stay for any kind of period of time, and certainly not the 20, 30 year expectations that we have with some of those technicians. So I'm fine with understanding that with millennials and Gen Z and that sort of thing. But I guess how does that translate to like you say, the majority of the staff, where it's a technician or a parts guy? That would be, I guess, my question is.
Again, I can't speak from that perspective, but I would assume that opportunity and kind of what can this company do for me. So if you are a service tech and you're getting that training, that the additional opportunities and whatever that means, and you do have some kind of career path laid out for you, I think that would still apply. I know, especially with service techs, that's a position we're constantly looking to fill. And like you said, it is a big loss of knowledge when you lose a service tech. But I think it's looking at, why did you lose them? Was it because the other opportunity was they had a mentor, they had, whatever it was that maybe we weren't offering. Sometimes it is just pay, or their family moved, or whatever, things we can't control. But if it is something we control, kind of looking at that why, what was more appealing for this company maybe down the road if they moved, because it's, I think, so worth investing in that training, and then keeping that person if you can, obviously. So I think it kind of comes back to that, what can this company give me, and looking at what we can do to keep those people. And again, it's going to be different for every person, but even if it's a service tech, maybe they do want to learn how to work on different equipment, or maybe they did feel like they weren't, getting the training opportunities they needed, or whatever it was that checked a box for that individual. Again, it's hard for me to speak on behalf of departments I'm not in, but I see some of that just from a recruiting standpoint with service techs in our company.
I see a couple hands. I'm going to hold off just 1 second, and then if we have time afterwards, I'll come back and get you. One quick comment to that about service techs. So I think that there is a chance that if this is our new reality and service techs' average tenure is 2 to 3 years, that we're going to have technology come in and figure out how to supplement that education, right? Mm-hmm. So like if we can't, if it's not sustainable, then somehow we're going to have to, whether it's using augmented reality when we're working on machines and having all the information available, like something is going to have to come and create that intersection, right? Real quick, Doug Tibbin, calling you out. What's your expectation for tenure at Pattison? Like, what do you, like when you think about how long your expectation is for people to stay? Is that a lifetime? Is it 2-3 years? What's your expectation?
Ideally, I'd love a lifetime.
Of course, but is that are you seeing that as a reality?
Reality is not.
Okay.
There's some people we don't want anyone in a couple of years. So what happens is the reality is if people are growing, adopting, they're trying, they feel part of the community inside the business, we want them to stay and they want to stay. We help create that culture. One of the most sought after questions we get is, what kind of culture is in this company? And I look at them in the eye and I say, whatever you make it. Because you're part of that. And if you make it a good culture, it is a good culture. If you make it a bad, it's bad.
Okay, thank you. 2 quick questions, and then we're going to get one last slide if I can sneak it in. How many dealerships in this room, or how many people, raise your hands, are doing employee surveys? Okay, great. So I think that is, I'm obviously highly biased and going to tell you that that's a very critical part of what you should be doing. Whether you use me or not, I think you should be doing it because you need to understand what's going on in your dealerships. The second question I have is, how many of you are doing exit surveys? Okay. So I think that's another thing that as you talk about why people are leaving and understanding why, that's a critical component. All right, can we go to the next slide real quick? So this is one I wanted to get into a little bit, and we only have a few minutes. Over the last 26 years, I've seen quite a transformation in the equipment industry with more women coming into the industry. Traditionally, when I first started, it was sort of kind of a good old boys network, very male dominated. And we're seeing a lot more women. We're seeing, like Women in AED is a great program for getting women engaged in equipment and things like that. But what we're seeing, which is interesting here, is that on the NPS side by gender, women are actually scoring slightly higher in these environments. And some of the feedback I got was like, wow, I'm kind of surprised by that. And some of the feedback I got, well, a lot of them are more in the marketing and administrative type roles, or not necessarily parts counters or techs or things like that. Now, whether that's accurate or not, it's going to be very specific to the dealership. The question I have for you two is, what's it like as a young woman, Gen Z millennial in the equipment industry, and what would you say about how dealerships need to make it a more friendly place or a more accommodating place for women looking to get into equipment?
I think that girls, females, women my age, you kind of know what you're walking into a male-dominant industry. So I think that might speak to why we score higher. Just you're going to go into that industry this industry, I guess, kind of knowing the crowd, knowing the customer base, knowing the type of employee that is in the dealership. So you just for me at least, you naturally learn to adapt to that and how to respond to that and when not to respond to that. But also creating a somewhere where we feel safe to talk to management, to talk to leadership if there are issues, and knowing that they will act on it or conversations will be had when needed, I think speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think you referred to the good old boys club, and I've definitely seen that in my time. And when I kind of alluded to the fact that the younger generations are less tolerant of that, I think a lot of that. I think that applies to that as well. I think that is a big piece that just can't be tolerated in the workplace anymore. And I think our generation isn't going to put up with it. It's not cute, it's not funny, and I think brushing it under the rug as that, oh, that's just Carl, he just does that, isn't okay. And it never was, but I think this generation is not going to accept it. And I think the younger generation is even better about it. And I've seen that on our team. We do have predominantly females on our team. And I even look at this generation and how like Gen Z and how they'll point things out and how this isn't okay. And as a millennial, I realized, wow, I kind of I felt like I was kind of leading the way by having certain expectations. And to see that next generation have even higher expectations of the kind of what they want from a workplace, the fairness that they expect, the equality that they expect. They don't hope for it, they expect it. And I admire that so deeply. And I think we're getting closer to that. That is something I really appreciate about Gen Z and their push for that. Again, it's expected. It's not something they're hoping for in the workplace.
Yeah, and I love it. I think this is a key point as we start to, how do we make our dealerships more Gen Z and millennial friendly? One of the components is, how do we make it more women friendly, right? How do we make sure that conduct is appropriate, that people understand what that means, and that it's addressed when there's issues and things like that. So I think that's a critical component. All right, you had a question and I want to get to it.
Just a comment.
Oh, shoot.
To try to keep the retention with maybe the redundant positions is I always talk to my guys about what does horizontal growth look like to you? Because you always think of vertical growth, climbing the ladder, but is there a new challenge? Is there a new piece of equipment you can work on? Could we pull them in to mentor? Could we help them? Or could we have them teach a class or something? Like just to give them that change of gears in their brain as well. So I think this concept of horizontal growth needs to be on our forefront in those particular roles, not just vertical growth.
Love it. It is 10:30, so I am going to end this. I think that's right. We're done at 10:30. Yes. So Emily, do you want to say something here?
Okay, just pulled up on our screen, we shared some data from our annual benchmark report, which actually gets released in March of every year. So this is the 2024 benchmark report. If you'd like to dive into anything a little bit further around employee engagement or even customer experience, you can scan that QR code to download it. And then we also have our summit coming up. It's virtual on March 12th. If you want to attend and see what's happening with the 2025 stats, we'll be looking at trends in our industry specific to heavy equipment dealerships.
Awesome. Can we get a round of applause for Peyton and Savannah? Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for coming.